and welcome to Take Time. I am your host, Patrick Marlette, and let's talk tuna. To be more precise, we'll be speaking of field tunas today, as in my hand I'm holding the SBDC035. So the Seiko SBDC035, or the earlier 011, is another Fieldmaster offering from the brand, and one of the first times, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe this is the first time they've used the tuna casing, the original tuna casing for anything other than a dive watch. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the first time I've ever seen it utilized in something other than a diver, and it's actually a very, very welcomed change. Unlike its SBBN tuna brethren, this offers a field of options that I think you'll be impressed with. However, as with all of my reviews on the channel, I'm going to start with the bad and then move on to the good in concerns to this field tuna. Now, the first bad note about this watch, and this may be bad or good for a variety of you, but this is a big watch. There's no mistaking the scale of this watch. It wears very large on the wrist, and that's because from lug to lug it measures about 47 millimeters. It's very reasonable. But the case all around, that is the measurement from shroud end to shroud end, is 48 millimeters. So it is a stocky, beefy watch. It measures about 14 millimeters thick from the case back to the top of the bezel. The glass is actually recessed, and we'll get into that later. And it has a 21 millimeter lug width. Now, the size of this watch isn't a major issue for me. I actually like how it wears on the wrist, and we'll see a wrist shot a little bit later. But I know for many of you that this is going to be a deal breaker. You never want to wear a watch that big. And this is one of the larger offerings from Seiko. I don't blame you. Now, aside from the scale of this watch being a negative note, when you're purchasing one of these Fieldmasters, you don't have a variety of strap options unlike its SBBN brother. As a matter of fact, when you go to purchase one of these Fieldmasters, if you can find one, and that's another relevant issue, if you can find one, you only get it paired with this double-breasted leather strap, this Fieldmaster leather strap. And I actually have a lot of good things to say about this. Again, I've sort of kept it on tags in the box because I want to preserve it for the time being, and as I was testing the watch, I would have preferred it on the NATO, so I put it on the NATO. But I'll talk about this strap in just a few. This is not a bad thing, but so far as options, you're left with one. Now, you've heard me mention the SBDC011 more than once during this video. This watch used to be called that before it moved over to the Prospects line. The only difference between the 011 and the 035 in front of me is the fact that this has the Prospects X logo on the dial there. That is literally the only difference between the two. Even the crowns are the same. This one has the same signed S crown, and that's actually a good note for a few people. But when trying to find these, you're gonna have a really tough time. Well, one, it's only for the Japanese domestic market, so you're gonna have to buy it from overseas, so you're not gonna have a warranty with this watch. I've not found an American distributor that would sell this. I actually bought this used from a gentleman who purchased it and just found it was too large for his wrist. So it, box papers, warranty, very, very good condition. But honestly, finding a reputable store to purchase it from is going to be difficult because they're not too common. And honestly, information on these watches and concerns to the material used in the construction, all that stuff is very hard to find. What I can say is that these are made in Japan and that the options so far as the materials are really great, so far as I've been able to find tech specs on. One of the final bad notes I'd like to mention about this watch is actually on the face itself. And it's unfortunate because this is a field watch. This is the Fieldmaster. And the cardinal directions on this bezel are great. I like how it's done. However, the black detailing that is set into the directions down here and the background of this upper register are high gloss, and you can sort of make out what I'm saying here. I wish that this was more of a matte finish because it's very hard to make out the details on this bezel in direct sunlight because it is picking up a lot of glare. And to cut down on the glare, they actually made the bezel itself concave, and you can see how it slopes down towards the crystal. But it's counterproductive in how they finish this bezel insert because it is again high gloss. So they've tried to cut down on the glare, but then introducing this highly reflective element to the bezel is just defeating the purpose of having the concave bezel. It's a little staggering a choice to make here. I mean, it gives it more of a dress appeal if that's what they were going for, but this is the Fieldmaster. They should have left it matte or maybe ceramic or some other material choice instead of this very, very high polish bezel insert. I'm just going to wave it around so you can see what I'm talking about, especially there at the top. You can see that it is highly reflective. Come on, Seiko. The last bad note I want to mention here is actually with the case design itself. It's unfortunate that they did this, but this lug width here, being 21 millimeters, is pretty obscure. I mean, the watch itself is very obscure to begin with, but the fact that they made this 21 millimeters sort of limits your options so far as straps are concerned, and you can see I'm using a 20 millimeter strap here. What I will say though is I don't necessarily mind the gap between the strap and the lug here. This doesn't bother me one bit at all, so this isn't a major issue for me. But if you do like straps that fit your watch perfectly and aren't a fan of the double-breasted leather strap, then it's unfortunate because you're probably gonna have a tough time finding nice 21 millimeter straps. The only bad thing I'd like to mention with this strap here is that a lot of the renderings you've seen of this watch have been completely overtouched. I don't know why they've done this with the imagery, but when I received this strap personally, I thought that it was going to be a light brown. This is more of a flesh tone. It's a very, very light beige and not light brown. And I have to say, I actually prefer this, but for all of the stock images I've seen, this comes off looking a much, much different color. Again, that light brown. So, you know, if you're looking to get a light brown double-breasted strap, I don't know if that is an offering and I just got the wrong one, but I'm pretty sure that this is the only color they offer, and it is a fleshier beige tone. So if that's not your style, you know, I'm sorry, and don't be disappointed because, you know, I kind of got the impression it was a different color too. All right, let's move on to some of the good and concerns to the Fieldmaster, or the Field Tuna, as many Seiko fanatics have lovingly named it. This is one of the finest made watches I have ever owned. The action, fit, finish, everything all around on this model is spectacular. It is one of the finest made watches I've ever owned. Let's talk about some of the materials that went into the construction of the watch and look at the finishing on it before we move on to some of those good points. So you have sapphire crystal on the front. Again, I believe an aluminum insert here on the bezel. You have a stainless steel bezel itself, stainless steel shroud, stainless steel case with a diversity of finishes. You've got high polished on the main body of the watch. You have these beautiful brush strokes all around the shroud, and not only the shroud, but the crown itself. And then you have a variety of frosted elements as well. So there's frosted steel in between the S logo and the brushing of the crown. You've got frosted steel along the outsides of the shroud, detailing these cutouts, the underside and the top side. You know, there's just such a level of detailing on what is relatively a simple watch that I'm just utterly stunned with how much detail went into this, even though it is, again, touted as a field watch. You'd expect something very basic, something simple, something plain, but they went over the top. And again, they have that polished insert as well. So they really did it up to be more of a presentational piece than a field watch in my mind, but overall, it really does work. Also, on the dial itself, you have applied markers all around. Of course, this is utilizing a 6R15 movement. That's right, an automatic movement in a Tuna. It's everything you guys were hoping for from the SBDN series, like a reasonably priced, I say reasonably priced, we can talk about that later, a reasonably priced Tuna with an automatic movement. That is awesome. It's really cool stuff. I'm glad that this exists for those people that wanted an automatic full-scale Tuna. Other fine details to note is that the dial here has an applied Seiko logo and is also a marksman dial. So you have a matte black with matte gray lines running between 12, 6, 3, and 9. Now, I didn't mention this as a part of my bad notes, but it is nigh impossible to find a watch without a date these days. I feel like 90% of the watches that go onto the main market have dates, and that's just how it's going to be, unfortunately. But they did tuck it away in one of my acceptable positions between the 4 and 5 o'clock here. Black background, same matte black as the dial, and the white font is not distracting. It's actually very easy to pick up on and read. It is a rather small window, but the font scale fills out the window in its entirety, and it is actually quite easy to read the date on the fly if you need that. Again, this thing is phenomenally built. I can't stress that enough. If you have a chance to get one of these in your hands, you'll soon learn what I'm talking about, but it is just one of those great watches. Let's talk about how nice the action is on this bezel, because I know a lot of you guys out there with dive watches or rotating bezels of any variety love to rotate the bezel. I do personally. This bezel is phenomenal. It's very well damped. Again, it reminds me of a good focus ring on a camera lens, like a high-end camera lens. It's extremely well dampened. That doesn't mean it's difficult to turn. It just means that it has a very nice stiff turn that's extremely practical. You're not going to be worried about this getting nudged around. Also, however they sealed this, when the bezel is at rest, it takes a little bit more muscle to move it from that at-rest position. And then, of course, it eases into that nice, smooth turn I was talking about. No grit, no nothing. Again, one of the finer bezel actions I've ever felt on a watch. And of course, I'm going to talk about that compass insert in a second. I know for some of you, that is a win or a loss, depending on where you're coming from. But again, this is a Fieldmaster, so it only makes sense that it has those cardinal directions instead of numerals on the bezel insert. And the crown action on this guy is amazing. As most of you know, the 6R15 movement is hacking and hand winding, and the threading on this crown is phenomenal. The action on the hand winding is great. It feels so well in the hand. There's no grit. And of course, this crown is humongous, and the tube and the stem for this crown are also humongous in scale. It feels very sturdy, very resilient. Everything you'd, again, hope for from a Fieldmaster watch. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you have a flat sapphire crystal on the front of this watch, and it is recessed into the dial just to avoid any bumps, nicks, or scratches that might occur when you're using this watch out on the field, as is the idea. And again, you do have a concave bezel. That is, the bezel itself swoops down towards the dial and the crystal, and you can see what I'm talking about here. And I wish that more watches did this. Despite the insert being glossy, it does cut down on the glare quite a bit, and it's just a better way to design a bezel. I'm assuming it's probably more affordable to do it another way, which is just that flat profile. This is infinitely better than that. I think it's a great design. A lot of old dive watches back in the days used concave bezels. I wish they would continue this moving forward. It's nice to see Seiko implement that here. Now, before I conclude my thoughts on the Fieldmaster, I want to talk very briefly about the leather strap. So as you guys can probably tell, I never wore this on the wrist because I kind of want to preserve the integrity of this strap just as a collector. I was interested in the watch head, not necessarily the leather strap itself, but I have to say this buckle is extremely weighty and extremely well made. It's replaceable and fixable via the spring bar that holds it all together, so that's really nice. I love when people use spring bars and or screw in pins for their buckles to make these future-proof. Many people do and some don't, so thank you, Seiko, for doing that. Of course, this is also made of stainless steel, and you have this really nice, high-quality, double-breasted leather strap. This is unlike anything Seiko has in their repertoire, and it's nice to know that they went out of their way to create this beautiful double-breasted leather strap just for this watch. I've not seen this strap utilized in any of their other watches, so it's cool that they would go out of their way to make something just for this watch. Along with the double breast padding, you have accent threading between it that it's also double stitched, and the outside perimeters are also double stitched. It's a very soft, supple strap. It doesn't have a great high-quality leather grain smell, so you are lacking that if you like to smell your straps on occasion like I do. But I have to say that the build quality overall is great. I'm sure it would wear very well on the wrist. I like the spacing. I can already tell you I like the spacing on the holes here. They did a great job with that. Sometimes you'll find these are too wide. I prefer tighter spacing and more holes because no one's going to see the bottom of my strap. So why don't you just make this superiorly wearable instead of having the strap's integrity maintained by having a few less holes. Just punch it up, make them tighter, just like this, and I think I'll be satisfied. So thank you. It looks like a very practical strap. Again, 21mm lug width, so if you don't have a plethora of 21mm straps, I think you can get away with this just fine, and it does complement the watch very well. I don't know how this sort of very light beige strap does it with this black and white, very monochrome dial, but it works. As I'm sure you're dying to know how this is going to look on the wrist, especially after I read those dimensions, I'm going to go ahead and show it to you on my 7¼ inch wrist. Now here is what the watch is going to look like for all of your admirers, and when you're going to admire it yourself, it's going to look a little something like this. And you can see already what I'm talking about. It is rather large in scale. It is a beefy watch, but it does follow a few guidelines, in my opinion, as to how a watch should fit. So personally, I feel a watch should never extend further from lug to lug than the scale of your wrist. That is the width of your wrist. And as you can see, this watch does perfectly fit on top of my wrist. You can still see my wrist on the sides, top and bottom. I don't necessarily care how wide a watch wears from left to right here on my wrist, again, so long as it does fit from lug to lug, and it does. The crown over at the 4 o'clock position doesn't dig into your wrist, whether it is on your left or right hand. You can see that this phenomenato does add a little bit of height, but even without that, even with straps that didn't add any sort of fabric between me and the watch, I found that the crown was very, very comfortable on the wrist. And although this isn't a video on compass bezels, I feel it's essential to talk about how the compass function works on this watch, so that if you guys are interested in buying it, you'll get a good sense of how you can use that in your day-to-day. All right, so I'm just going to use this Vostok of mine to represent the sun in this demonstration. So it's over right around the 11 o'clock position. So it's important to note that when you're using the compass bezel, that one, you need to be in normal time, that is to say, not in daylight savings hours. So if you are ahead, you want to set your hours back or try to approximate where the hour hand would be for this to all work out. Now with the sun at about 11 o'clock, what we're going to do is position our hour hand to face the sun. And of course, you want to have this watch head relatively parallel to the Earth's surface. Okay, so that's the only way this is going to work somewhat effectively. And again, this isn't the most accurate measurement for your cardinal directions, but it is going to help you get a general idea of where you're going. So we've got our hand that is, facing the sun, and then we're going to move our bezel so that the south marker is between the hour hand and the 12 o'clock position. So approximately, and we can go ahead and adjust it here just to make absolutely certain, approximately about there. So now you have north, south, east, west, and any varying degree in between. Again, from north to east, there's 90 degrees in between, so you've got those markers just in between to help you gauge what degree you're looking at. Now, bear in mind, this compass trick is only going to work if you are in the northern hemisphere. So what would you do if you're in the southern hemisphere? Well, you'd point your hour hand at the sun, and you'd move the bezel so that the north is between the hour hand and the 12 o'clock position. And now we have our north and south again. Fairly simple trick. It's just the opposite if you're in the southern hemisphere, so not a huge problem, not anything horribly difficult to deal with. And that is how you use one of these compass bezels. Now, is it absolutely essential that you have those degrees and cardinal directions marked on your bezel insert? No, but guys, this is a Fieldmaster after all. It should have that on the bezel insert to help guide you if you're on the field. And if worst comes to worst and your phone isn't working, so you can use your compass there, or you don't have a magnetic compass, then this is going to be the next best option. And it's very cool that this is still offered today. So overall, if you like the Field's Tuna and have been on the fence about getting one, again, I think it is one of the finest made watches. It has a lot of functionality and a lot of great materials put into its construction. Again, you're getting an automatic movement, a great 6R15. You're getting a sapphire crystal. I know a lot of you guys complain about the hardlex that's still used on the SBDNs. So already you get a whole host of options that are more favorable. Let me just say, I love hardlex, but sapphire crystal is more scratch resistant, and I'm sort of a nut about scratches on my watches, unless it's acrylic. I love acrylic above all else because those are easy to polish out, and I actually kind of like the scratch and wear on that kind of crystal. If you liked this video, feel free to hit that like button. It looks a little something like this. If you have friends, forums, or groups that are interested in watch content as well, maybe share this video with them so that we can build our community just a little bit bigger. Also, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, get to it. Guys, we do videos like this 2 to 3 times a week, so if you want to see more watch-related content, then come here. And by the way, there's a bell that notifies you immediately when these videos come out, and that is actually right next to the subscribe button, so you can hit that while you're down there too. Again, my name is Patrick Marlette, and thank you for the time.